Welcome, everybody. I'm Phil Goldberg. I'm a board member of ASI, and I'm standing in at the moment for Jack O'Keefe, who is the only truly indispensable member of the ASI team. And in her absence, I was asked to welcome you all and introduce our presenters for the day. So we're going to be speaking about conscious care. And this happened because the three women experts who are going to present today had the idea of presenting something as a webinar for ASI, and we all thought it was a very good idea. They're all three colleagues in working with dreams with their clients. And they have a strong interest in that context about working in an ethical manner and what constitutes ethical practice and ethical behavior. And so they teamed up for this presentation. I will let them describe what's coming up themselves and anything they want to say about themselves, but we want to welcome Catherine Bell, Catherine Lawson, and Jarrett Bouillon. And I will say they're going to speak for 10, 15 minutes. And does that mean each? Yes, okay. And then we, at a certain point, we'll open it up to questions, and we would ask everybody to please be mindful of the time and the desire on all our parts to hear from anybody who has a question or a comment. So please be succinct in your questions or comments when you are when you have the microphone, and be mindful that others are also wanting to have some time. So I will introduce the two Catherines and Jarrett, and I think Catherine Bell is going to speak first. So welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. Yes, I really appreciate this opportunity to share something I'm really passionate about. When I first introduced to the ASI, the SAND meeting in 2018, 17, whenever it was like, these are my people. This is something I take very seriously. I am a dream coach, and I have a podcast, and I'm also a member of the ethics committee of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. And I take this sort of work very seriously, having been part of some breaches that were not good. So I'm going to do a quick screen share just to make a quote so you guys can see. This is all being a PDF I'll share with you guys when we're before we finish. But I wanted to just take one line out of this statement of ethics here, this underlined statement here. The IASD, some background noise. IASD supports an approach that respects the dreamer's dignity and integrity, and which recognizes the dreamer as a decision maker regarding the significance of the dream. And now I'm talking about dreams here, but this applies to any kind of spiritual work, because a dream is a spiritual experience as much as any kind of vision or any kind of like moment of full body like realization, that these spiritual experiences and dreams have a lot in common. And I want to talk about the idea that the dreamer, or in this case, the seeker, people who are asking our help, that the seeker should be allowed to be the decision maker regarding the significance of their experience. And so I wanted to just put that up. And like I said, that will be in a PDF, which I'll share with you guys before the end of this. So the idea that it is the person who has the experience that should be allowed to be the decision maker regarding what that experience means. And that this ethics statement is often summarized in dream circles as only the dreamer can say. And perhaps we can say in terms of spiritual work, only the seeker can say. So is there a way that we can let the seekers have their own experience. So a big part of ethics for me and the spiritual work that we all do is teaching people how to recognize and trust their own insights. So we do bring, as teachers and leaders, we do bring a contribution of experience and perspective, but how do we teach people to recognize their own insights, to learn what they learn? So in dream work, there's something called the dreamer's aha. And perhaps we could call it the seeker's aha, which is that when you have that aha moment, it's actually even a Wikipedia page about aha. You're like, oh, I get it now. Like that sense of like, aha, that if you teach people to recognize that sense of something meaningful has just occurred. And it can be something that we don't understand, that the aha is actually an embodied flash of insight. And there may be no words at all. Sometimes the aha can just be like, oh, okay, something true just happened. Something true is here. And we don't necessarily have to know what something means in order to find it meaningful. And so I think the teaching the people who are in our groups or who are taking classes from us, to trust their own insight is like an integral part of being an ethical leader, I believe, because I can never really know what it means for somebody else. Any experience that somebody has is their experience alone, and I will never know what that is. And so this brings me to the idea of living with uncertainty, that as a leader, as a spiritual guide or a teacher in any way, I may never know what the experience means for the people in my groups. And even working one-on-one with people as I do around their dreams, I may never know what that dream really means to them, but I can learn to live with that uncertainty and to trust that they are getting something meaningful out of that. And especially if they know what this aha, this embodied aha, what it feels like, they can trust that, okay, something meaningful is here. So we can definitely offer our perspectives, since as leaders, we do have experience, but I actually often try to offer a perspective that's dual. Like I might offer two possible ideas around a dream so that they don't immediately go to the one idea that I have. I try to offer like a range of experiences and say like, well, some people have found this to be so, and other people have found another way of looking at this, so that it makes people really fall back on their own insight and learning to trust themselves. And that's, I think, as a coach and as a guide, that we can really teach people to learn to trust themselves, and that will help them in so many ways, even beyond the spiritual realm, also in all kinds of waking life. So there's something that I call the dreamer's paradox, which is that a dream is mysterious, a dream is mysterious, especially to the dreamer, and yet that dreamer is the only one who can know what that dream truly means. So I'm going to put this in terms of more general spiritual experience, is like a spiritual experience is mysterious, especially to the person having the experience. And yet that person is the only one who can really know what it means. And so it's a paradox, because, as an experienced guide, I might recognize a certain place where this person is in their journey, and I might have a lot to say about it, and yet I don't want to lead them in a way that's not appropriate for that person. And so I have to see what they respond, and so to let them trust themselves, and to see that aha moment, that full embodied sense of, okay, something makes sense here. So how do I avoid the temptation to interpret someone else's spiritual experience? Practice. And that I often find myself saying, oh, say to myself, hopefully, I know what that dream means, or, I know what that experience means, but I want to hold that to myself and just say, maybe I know, maybe I don't. And so to leave space for them to understand their experience in their own way. And, that protects me as well, because I don't want to be a guru. I don't want to be somebody who has to be right. I don't want to have to, be held accountable for people making decisions. I had a teacher who used to say, my advice is that you don't offer any advice. because it's just can lead people into a place where that's not healthy for them. So I would say it's a question of, it's an ongoing practice of me to be, to notice if I'm holding an interpretation in my mind, and notice if I'm saying it out loud. And that comes back to my own biases, and Jarrett and Catherine are going to talk a lot more about that, the way that our biases affect the way we interact with our people, our seekers. And so it takes a lot of practice, and the most valuable tool that I have found to hone my practice is peer groups. I must say, peer groups where you get together with other people in similar leadership positions and can talk about my experiences with my people. Like maybe something came up in workshop, and I go to my peer group and I'd say, oh, well, something happened and I don't know if I should worry about that, or what could I have done differently? So it's about learning to hold our seekers more lightly and let them have their own experience. And we do offer our own wisdom, our own interpretation, our own, see, interpretation, that word creeps in, offer our own experience and perspectives. And yeah, I want to have a lot of space for the people I'm working with to have their own experience, because new things arise all the time, and I want to be open to that. Paying attention to the body is very important. I think Jarrett and Catherine will be talking about that as well. But I want to just finish with a quote, and I'm trying to track down the source of it. It was from a podcast, but this has almost become my motto. And I got to find out who said it. But it's, the definition of a good person is someone who's trying to be a better person. So we don't have to be perfect, but we can be better. And peer groups is one of the key ways that I actually tune in to get feedback and to learn how to be a better leader. So I see just a little over 9, so I'm done. That's all I had to say. I will share this PDF with you when all 3 of us have finished speaking, and we'll also hold questions till the end. So we'll have all 3 of us have a chance to speak, and then we'll open it up to more general discussion. I'd love to hear some examples from your practices that you'd like to share. So this could be a giant peer group for all of us. David, yes. Why do you have your, oh, peace. That was, it's just a thumbs up. Okay, so Jarrett Bouillon is next. I will cede the stage to her. Oop, wrong button.
It would help if I unmuted. That would make it a little bit easier for you to hear me. So I am delighted to be here today. I will be speaking from a slightly different perspective, and I want to start with actually a quote from someone else. We are obsessed with cults. This is the zeitgeist of our current culture. These words are written by Sarah Edmondson, who wrote the foreword to my book, which is called An Everyday Cult. That book is a memoir based on my experience. Sarah Edmondson, in case you have not heard of her, is an actress and a key whistleblower for NXIVM, which is a cult led by Keith Raniere. He was convicted in 2020 on all charges of racketeering, including sex trafficking, forced labor conspiracy, human trafficking, and multiple counts of racketeering. This guy is now serving a 120-year jail sentence. I kind of imagine this kind of perspective is not very commonly brought up in spiritual circles, but I feel compelled to bring this here because, my friend and colleague Sarah was literally branded with a hot iron in a women's empowerment ceremony after 12 years of being involved with this leader. In what she now realizes was indoctrination into this unethical personal growth training. I also was part of a cultic group, but a very different one. I was in for 18 years. It was based on dream analysis, and it also promised personal growth. There, I experienced just this slow erosion of my autonomy and of my core values. And I became increasingly increasingly dependent on my ex-teacher, Doug, to the point that I could not make a single decision without his input. I trusted Doug more than I trusted myself. My experiences, if you're interested, you can, they're detailed in my book. And I'm happy to speak about any questions you might have of this a little bit later in our question and answer period. But a recent article I read on Vice reported that there are over 30 million Americans who still believe in the QAnon conspiracies, even though it's been over 2.5 years since there was the last Q drop. At the same time, we have tens of thousands of people who are radicalized into extremist groups, both on the left and the right. And it's primarily done through the internet, but they're using surprisingly similar techniques that were employed by both groups, the one that Sarah Edmondson was a part of, as well as what I was involved in, because they harness the common, like universal human traits and garner control, exploit money, our bodies, and the precious commodities of our time, our thoughts, and of course our spirit. So, and I would say since I got out of CTL, the group I was a part of for 18 years, I've really dedicated my life to studying these dynamics and like, what is it that allowed me to go that far from myself. I've also heard the personal stories of literally like thousands of people in a very wide range of harm, everything from literally slavery and labor and sex trafficking to physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse. And they were all done by the hands of unethical, controlling leaders. And I can promise you that this kind of abuse of power takes place in many subtle ways. And it's not always easy to spot. And I know this is part of what ASI is all about, because I was deeply grateful when I got out to find ASI and realize, oh, there are ethical leaders. And yet, I think it's really important for us to realize that being an ethical leader is an active process, because we are a profoundly social species. Our brains, our psyches are wired for survival through the company that we keep. So any exploration that we're doing about how control might happen unethically and how we might care for people who ask for our help, you know, it's only helpful to a point without also focusing on unethical leadership. So one of the questions that I think is really important for us as leaders to bring into our work is transparency. How transparent are you about the work that you do, that you offer people who ask for your help? Do you give credit where credit is due? How is it? Like, how do you derive the therapeutic or philosophical foundations of your work? I ask this because transparency builds trust, while the lack of it creates a kind of mystique. And that mystique can be unethical and is more likely to slip into the more cultic realms. In NXIVM, Sarah Edmondson is now very clear that Keith Raniere leaned into many different modalities. You know, neurolinguistic programming, Scientology, EST, LifeSpring, Buddhist teachings, hypnosis, all kinds of stuff, David Hawkins, and very little. Actually, I think the only one he was maybe transparent about was NLP, I'm not sure. But because he portrayed himself as the smartest man in the world, there was a pedestal that he stood upon. And that kind of mystique is actually led to the lack of transparency was contributed to that pedestal that others put him on. And there are many other factors that led to that pedestal as well. I would urge each one of us to really consider how we influence those of us who seek our help and find ways to do a reality check. Are our assumptions correct? I would encourage you to periodically check in with your clients and see if what you think is true. And I say that because I recently had a doctor's appointment. I shared with Catherine this last week that I got these recommendations from her through the patient portal about some diet changes, and I really tried to follow through on her recommendations and beat myself up. Like I wasn't really able to do it. And I felt a kind of anxiety going into my next appointment with her. And I told the doctor about this, and I was, like I said, I was anxious. I was a bit of a mess. I thought she might consider me rebellious or disrespectful. And all of that feeling was like, because she's an authority. And when I told her this, she was like, oh, Jarette, heck no, that's not at all what I was talking about. It was just a gentle suggestion, like it's not, I wasn't expecting you to do all that. So reality testing is really important. And I have to say, I was really surprised for myself because I've done like so much work and so much healing in the 8 years since I've left the cultic environment. It was humbling for me to realize, to witness in myself how I had, how that authority figure impacted me. So I want to ask you, do you really know how your clients are responding to your suggestions? And I believe, I would actually wager to bet that some, if not many of them, are taking what you say with greater weight than you may intend, simply because of your status. So, you know, we can think we know what they're thinking. Catherine also said this, but we, in truth, we really may not know. And actually, we can't know because we're not them. To be an ethical leader is to be aware of this power differential and to be committed and active about balancing that kind of scale. You know, we can err, you know, thinking that we're being clear when we're actually, people are misunderstanding us. And if we do that, we can slide into a kind of authoritarian mindset because in many, many ways, an authoritarian mindset is the water that we swim in. We live in a deeply patriarchal culture. You know, my definition, my simple definition of authoritarianism is believing that you know something about a person that they don't know themselves. You know, we might have really compelling or juicy work to share with the world. And yes, we do have something to share. But if you think you know something that someone else doesn't, that's where I would encourage you to check yourself, because based on what I shared just a few minutes ago, there are profound negative effects when we are not truly conscious and truly being, you know, practicing how we can avoid this kind of harm. I think one of the best ways that we can help ourselves in this way is to actually listen, truly listen to your clients' stories. Listen for themes of submission. Listen for themes where they may have lost autonomy and ask about it. Because any stories of power over abuse, I believe, is actually the antidote to the authoritarian structures that we see rampaging society today, both in the United States and worldwide. I have a document that I'll share with you, a PDF that has a list of questions that you can kind of along this line. There are more questions that I hope you will commit to staying active, to reviewing these questions on a monthly basis or more frequently. Because I truly believe that through our conscious attention to those people who do seek our care and our leadership, you know, it's my deepest hope that this obsession with cults, as Sarah Edmondson calls it, is actually harnessed for truly authentic healing, for deeper understanding, for prevention of harm, and for a deep respect for the autonomy of each person who comes to us. So that in that way, you know, we're truly and actively cultivating discernment and compassion wherever we are led. So yeah, with that, I'll share my PDF a little bit later and really look forward. I'm very excited that this presentation is really mostly about dialogue. And I really welcome that dialogue after we hear from Catherine Lawson now.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all here, happy to be here. And thank you, Jarrett and Catherine. I guess, I'll start by introducing myself. I have worked as a psychotherapist. I'm trained as a depth psychotherapist. I also have a doctorate in mind-body medicine, and I'm a certified embodied imagination practitioner, which is a form of dream work that's also used with memories. I say all of those things, and then as a preface and once I got all of those fancy credentials, I've been on a steady process of unlearning. And so I also have written a book on dream work called Dream Work for Growth and Healing. And I guess building on what both Catherine and Jarrett have had to say, I feel like it might be good to just dive into some of the ways that I have begun as a practitioner of embodied imagination and as a psychotherapist, practicing mind-body medicine, to do the kind of checking in that Jarrett was just mentioning. I have noticed, and actually am fairly uncomfortable with, the power dynamic that exists between someone who calls themselves a healer, a therapist, a leader. When I have the doctor out in front of my name, which I don't, always do, but it's instantaneous. And the main thing actually is being aware of that power dynamic, being aware of the fact that people are looking for and want and need and are called to answers, are seekers. And so that power dynamic exists instantly. And so what a part of our job it is, in fact, to become aware of that and how we feel about that and what it's doing for us and who we're in service to. So one of my biggest, checkpoints is in almost everything, every time that I speak, taking a little bit of a pause and considering, who is this in service to? Also making myself really aware of how good it feels to be stroked with this gaze of expertise, right? Or to have someone look at you with the aha look in their eyes, right? And doesn't it feel good? And can't we just acknowledge that? And that has some power over us and our behavior and the way that we lead and sit with people. So for about the past 10 to 15 years, I've been researching and sitting very deeply with the parallels between mysticism, dream work, and psychedelics. And I found that there's a lot of parallels in those things. that also apply here, because we're talking about people who are seeking expanded states of consciousness, being courageous enough to sort of put their habitual consciousness aside or their ego perspectives, and they're kind of wide open, right? And so that is something that is so courageous on their part, is so, I feel so honored to be in the presence of the courage that it takes to do that, and the curiosity that the perspective that I find keeps me from that, ooh, I'd like one of those strokes, is really tending to that space that they're honoring and humbling us, any of us who are healers, by bringing. The other thing is that it's really important to notice and be very aware of your own history and your own triggers, because you can then start to pick up, oh, they're mentioning something that's really pertinent in my life or my history, and I better watch out. It's like a little flag that comes up and says, you know, let's say you have a child who struggled with addiction and someone comes to you on the topic of addiction. Well, are you checking yourself to make sure that you're in service to their particular situation, and not a need to air your own experiences that you may not have tended to, right? A need to get empathy or seen for the experience that you've been through. And so therefore you're seeking that from the very person who's seeking guidance from you. So it's really, you know, the program where I got my master's for counseling psychotherapy was a great one, because honestly, one of the first things that they told us to do was to check ourselves on that. We had to do psychotherapy twice a week, actually, at the very beginning, because we were making sure that we're all wounded healers, right? I've not met a healer who's not a wounded healer in my 58 years. So checking to make sure that we're in service to those who, and can we grow out of that experience? Of course we can. You know, it's a tremendous opportunity for growth and sharing love and sharing healing. But staying in service is really the big check. Another flag, in addition to things from your own history, is things that you hold particular judgment on, noticing when that comes up and finding ways to kind of check yourself, noticing your own stories, and deciding whether you want to influence someone else. So at this point, I'm going to go a little bit into my practice of embodied imagination for two reasons. One is because one of the first things that we do, and this also happens when in mystic practices and when people are integrating psychedelic experiences, is that we scan ourselves to see what's ours, and it helps us very much to differentiate from what's ours and what is theirs. And we can tell this and we can feel this in the body. But before we do that practice, which I think might be a good lead into asking questions, I just want to say that one of the reasons that I chose to embrace embodied imagination as a practice, and I actually practice that preferentially to psychotherapy at this point, is because it is a practice in which people are guided to become embodied by their dream images or their memory images or their psychedelic visions or whatever. So what that means is that they arrive at a state in which the images can speak for themselves. And that takes the pressure off me to analyze what their images could potentially mean. If you are inside the body, possessed by, or inside the perspective of a particular image, then you sense what's going on in your own body. So if I've had a dream and there's a cat in the dream and I've been guided to become embodied by the cat, then the cat begins to speak for itself. And I know that this all sounds, but maybe not in this crowd, a little bit wild. But the idea is that the more you can get out of your own way, and this includes with your clients, and allow their experience, their embodied experience, the experience, what their particular images, their particular memories have to say, the safer it is for them. And the safety of the container that you're creating is really where any kind of healing or growth can happen. Outside of a container of safety, it's all about you. It's no longer about them. And so checking in on how they're feeling safety-wise, you'd be amazed how often that doesn't happen. Does this feel safe? Am I going the right way? Ask them. Ask them if it feels safe. Ask them if it feels like the right way. Ask them how it feels in their bodies. And you can be more assured that you're not in possession of that desire to the seduction of the power imbalance. And so before an embodied imagination practice, or before, now I've taken to even doing it with psychotherapeutic clients, I guide them to breathe with me, and I guide them to scan their bodies, and I do it for myself. And the reason for doing that is, again, noticing the difference between what is me and what is you, because it can become very, very fuzzy. And this is usually done in maybe 20 seconds and can change the whole direction of an interaction. And so if you feel comfortable, I'm just going to give you an example of how to help people notice the difference between them and some experience that they might be having. I will add that it will sometimes enhance their abilities to take part in an experience that they're having, because they notice it as different from their baseline, I guess I would call it. So again, this will take about 10 seconds, and I think I'd like to just demonstrate this experience. I usually will guide people to turn inward in whatever way feels comfortable for them. Some people don't like to close their eyes. They don't feel safe. I'll ask them to lower their gaze if that's okay. I'll ask them to become aware of their intentions. And if you all would like to follow along, we can do this together for just a few seconds. I'll ask them to become aware of the sound of my voice. And I'll remind them that we're going to do a body scan, not with the intention of changing a single thing, but just to notice how things are right now. Just allowing and noticing, so that should things change, they'll have more ability to notice that and to sense into what that's about and what's there for them. And I'll tell them that I'm going to guide them down, counting back from 10. And as we go down from 10, we're going to start at a point at the very top of the head, a little ball filled with their intentions and warmth. And as we go down through the body, we're just going to bathe all the areas with our attention, not trying to change a single thing. So with 10, we're actually just going to drop down into the head and notice how things are in this very moment. So you may become aware of your eye sockets. Sometimes we hold tension there. Or your nasal passages as the air moves in and out. You might notice your scalp or your jaws. Whatever's there, just noticing. There's no need to change anything. And then we're going to descend. We're just going to continue to descend with a warm bath of attention down through the throat. You might notice the muscles that allow you to swallow, or the ones that hold the weight of your head in the back. You might notice dryness, moisture. Just notice how things are in this very moment. 9, you're going to go down over the sides of the neck into the balls of the shoulders, just noticing down into the biceps and triceps, continuing to descend. The joints of the elbows. 8, continuing to descend all the way down through the wrists and into the hands. Notice if there's any weight or temperature, nerves and skin, and follow those hands down through the fingers, down to the very tips, even the fingernails, just noticing. And with the next breath, 7, noticing the rise and fall of your chest. Noticing the way your very particular heart beats. Descending down through the organs. 6, stomach, intestines, the coils of the intestines. Stomach, just allowing the warm bath of your attention to see how all of those parts are right now. And continuing to descend, 5, down into the pelvic cavity, sexual organs, low back, sacrum. How is that in this very moment? And from the sacrum, we're just going to take a small detour and we're going to follow your spine. The spine as it curves up through the low back, mid back, nerves and muscle, all connecting, upper back, all the way up to the skull and back down. Vertebra by vertebra, down to the seat, to the pelvic cavity, to the hips. 4, and from the hips, noticing where the big bones of the thighs connect and descending down through those muscles, down into the knee joints and the shins and the calves. Just noticing. 2, moving down into the ankles, the feet, the bones of the feet, all the way out to the toes. And with 1, landing at the soles of the feet and taking a moment to notice that the soles of your feet, one way or another, through floor or foundation, connecting you to Mother Earth, noticing her gravity, holding you present, centered, and grounded. And then with your next breath, coming back, whoops, I spun around there. And now what happens when you create this space for your clients is that they now have a space of a baseline to notice, and you can encourage them and ask them as you work with them now, how does that feel in your body? Does it feel true? Where do you feel truth in your body? Does it feel frightening? Where do you feel frightened in your body? There is no better barometer than your body for you as the practitioner, for noticing if you've been gripped by the desire to stay in that position of superiority regarding what is true and what is right, and what is real and what is growth for your clients. And there's no better position for them either. So yeah, that's it. I hope that was useful for someone or anyone. And I will turn it over to questions now, if anyone has questions for any of us.
Do we see hands?
I'm also going to put in the chat in a PDF, so I want to share it with you guys. And I think Jared had one too.
Questions and comments from anyone? I'm looking for the hand raised. It's an exceptionally quiet crowd. David or Rick, do you have questions for them? David Spector, I see. David, go ahead.
I'm wondering whether the speakers, all three of the speakers, whether any of them have had any temptations to engage in any unethical behavior at any time in their career as a spiritual leader. And if so, what about that experience would be helpful for others to know?
I love this question. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
It was in the aftermath of realizing, you know, when I snapped out of the group that I had been dedicated to for so long, and which I, you know, truly experienced indoctrination. I was like so excited to learn about unethical leadership, and you know, the cult dynamics and all of that, and I was so passionate about it that. And yet at the same time, I was still also very much involved in the mindset that I had been, the stew that I had been living in for 18 years. I started actually offering some workshops with other people that I collaborated with. And, you know, having people in a room, like being, you know, sitting in the leader position and having people kind of looking at me and saying, oh, she seems smart and has something to share. I got high from it. Like it was a buzz. And it was through that experience that I had this kind of like wake up, like, holy shit. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't swear in this circle, but I just did. Sorry. You know, like, you know, I just did. I was just tempted, you know, to kind of take that little role of superiority. And then that, you know, for me, that was the place where I realized that intricate link between harm and harmful influence and ethical leadership. So now that I truly believe we have to always be looking at both.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. You know, I have to say that it happens every day. I feel like the seekers offer me the opportunity to do that every day, because very often they ask me for answers and I don't hold them, they do. But wouldn't it feel great to be able to be the person with all the answers? So I find myself in a position where I could be called into unethical behavior every day. I'll also say that recently, one big situation that's been coming up is that I'm affiliated with an organization called MAPS, which does plant and psychedelic medicine research. And I got affiliated with them as a plant medicine integration specialist. I used embodied imagination to help people integrate those experiences. As a result of being on their website, I got flooded with phone calls with people who were looking for healing by way of plant medicine. And I offer integration. And so many people were like, well, do you know where I could go to get some of these medicines? Or could you sit with me and give me some of these medicines? Or do you? And I have great faith in the healing capacity of these medicines, but I don't even feel comfortable referring people, because if I haven't sat with someone, I guess what I'm trying to say is, in your call to be of service, very often you can get quite identified with that and maybe step beyond your boundaries of what you should be trying to help someone. And so it's real, for me, a mantra that I sort of keep is stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. And my lane has nothing to do with referring people to these medications, administering people. I just help people to integrate those experiences. Is it tempting to try and help people who come with great suffering and who have not been helped by anything else? Because I know that how helpful some of these things can be. It's absolutely tempting. But I think it happens every day. I think that that's the awareness that we have to bring, is that it's happening every day, the opportunity to behave unethically as a healer, leader, guide.
Other questions, comments?
So we go to
There-
the next person on the hand up, Catherine Schultz.
I can't see.
Hi. So I've got a lot of things I'm trying to put together with the presentation, but it seems like there's a kind of looking, or a lens and an inquiry about how would we be with one-on-one clients, and looking at what does it mean if they're seeking to grow a stage, moving beyond certain stages of development, different lines of development, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and what the power relationship is as the roles we're playing. So if I'm a role of a parent, I'm playing it, and what does it mean to be an ethical parent versus an ethical therapist versus an ethical leader of a larger space, of a larger meme, if you will, like the guy with the NXIVM and some of these cult leaders, Benton Ho. It's coming out all the time that these spiritual leaders, they haven't done their inner work around their certain stages of development, emotionally, mentally, whatever that might be. But when they hit the spiritual realm and you've got the seeking going on, if they get large, then you start to see the cult. And so I heard one of the girls talking about, the cult issue is rampant in the society because there's this issues around giving your power over and to authority. And I'm wondering, but then it seemed to sort of migrate back to the one-on-one relationship in the therapeutic and what the power is there. And are you finding or having a sense that if people who are doing the one-on-one therapeutic dynamic, is that possibly starting to shift how they view these larger teachers relative to getting caught in a cult? And also, I think there's a difference with teaching around certain material things, or when you go to school and what are you going to learn? There has to be a space for the teacher to teach and learn from the teacher that information. But then when you're looking at the spiritual lines, that's where it does get a little more fuzzy around the trainer, the dream work or things that's where the person has to check in and find their own voice in that dance. So I'm just wondering though, how does this translate, or are you seeing anything with, these one-on-one work versus these larger teachers that are still doing so much exploitation? It seems overall, from the species point of view, you're only seeing still, smaller sections looking at interested in democracy and democratic leadership versus just so much of an interest in the autocratic models and the cult for organizing. And so I don't know what there seems to be a big tension there, but I'm wondering how you're putting some of that together, and there's different ways that the roles, the spheres of influence around power play itself out. And so it's very different with the one-on-one sharing and what's your voice versus you've got you're the head of the classroom.
Well, I agree with Catherine's chat there that I think the dynamics are very similar, that those power over power under dynamics can occur on any scale. And, even internally, like I can be very controlling of myself sometimes, and I have to learn to bring tenderness to myself. And then in the one-on-one relationship, even in the cult of two, they call that sometimes when there's just two people in a relationship, but one is more controlling, and also can extend to small groups or larger groups. I think it's a very similar dynamic on all the different scales.
You're seeing the meme being essentially the same, and then it's like, well, where is the leverage point in the work would be the inner work, and then the work with one-on-one clients, and then if you have a larger voice, how do you use that voice?
I think it's important to keep, I wholeheartly agree with, yes, these dynamics can exist on any layer of society, from, the one-on-one to, governments.
Right.
And what the other thing that I think is very important to keep in mind is that there is a very wide spectrum of influence. So from the deeply harmful, all the way to, influence that is actually helpful. I mean, we all are students, we've all been students. We all have been in, we can't avoid authority. We can't avoid hierarchy. A parent-child relationship is a hierarchy. So, a child, relies on that, on adults. But if you're really interested in that kind of topic, which I think we could go into, believe me, I can talk about this stuff for a very long time, but I just want to point the speaker, Catherine Schultz, to the work of Dr. Steve Hassan. And his work is really, that's kind of that's his domain, and he really speaks to it in a very articulate, all-encompassing way. And feel free to reach out to me and I can point you to some more specifics or even introduce you. So.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Shall we move on to another question? Bevan? I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
I think that Annie had her hand raised earlier.
Oh, who?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead then. Yeah, let's take everyone in order.
There was electronic order.
Oh, it was in order. That's what, I guess it's different on everybody's screen. Okay.
Did I make
Go ahead, Annie.
Am I supposed to go? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Bevan was
Annie.
So mine is a very brief question. Sorry, Bevan, mine's brief. You hear me? Yeah, okay. So I was just thinking about, is there a going theory why there are certain people that just fall prey to these groups, these cults? Like, I remember when I was very little, I was brought up Catholic, and certain things were told to me, like only Catholics got into heaven. And I remember having a really strong sense that this wasn't true. And I think we're all born with this sense of autonomy and this truth inside of us, an inner compass. So why is it that, like I watched something about that Warren Jeffs guy the other day. He does the Fundamentalist Mormon, there's a Netflix documentary on that series. And these people just completely, they grew up in it. Of course, that's part of the answer probably. But is there a deeper understanding of why we stray as humans and fall prey to this authoritarianism? It's a very big question, I know, but I just wanted some. Are there certain people that just are less likely to do this innately? Is there? Yeah, it's a very big.
I know I don't want to dominate this, but this is specifically my work. And very briefly, idealists tend to be people who are drawn into environments where we're seeking. Seekers are people who are drawn into environments where you want to learn something. So in that way, there is a wide diversity of people that are drawn into these environments. And I think it's very important for people to understand that susceptibility is actually present in the universal human traits that we all possess. We are wired to belong. And very often it's not uncommon for moving into, if you're not born into a group, which many millions of people are born into controlling groups. But if you go in as an adult, there's a greater likelihood that you're experiencing some sort of a life transition or at a vulnerable moment, which is why recruitment is targeted to college campuses and people in transition. Right. So those are just a couple of quick thoughts, but we could spend a whole seminar on that.
And that gets back to asking about people's stories, and if we suspect they might be more vulnerable to this kind of control, we can be extra careful.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true. I was just trying to understand the neurology, and I guess it's too large a question. Actually, it just happens, and that's all we know. And I'll stay with that. Thank you very much.
Actually, I would add that people have done a lot of research on susceptibility to cult behavior and who is susceptible, who's not. I'm not up on the research, but I've seen many, many references to a psychologist doing that kind of research. I'm sure you can find online.
Yes. Healthy skepticism is one of the greatest protectors that we have. Critical thinking, pausing, but it's a very complex issue, actually.
Right. Well, I think we all have an innate discernment. We just carry that it's available to us, but, it gets clouded over, I guess. But anyway, this might not be helpful to this larger conversation, but I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Who's next? Is it now Bevan's turn or Thomas first?
Bevan should be next, in my opinion.
Okay, Bevan, there you go.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you to the association and all the speakers for what you offered, and particularly the portion where you talked about sharing your own experiences to sort of mirror what a client is saying. And I certainly have done that probably in many, many cases under the idea or the mentality that I was relating rather than seeking attention. But it's a really interesting piece for me to go back and look at that and ask my clients, can I share one of my own experiences and get their permission before doing so, and allow them to set the tone for that. So I thank you for that deeply. That was really great. And it was funny because I actually made a video this morning for my email list about this very topic, because last week I was actually going to a healer. I wasn't the person, facilitating and holding that container. And as I usually do when I go to a massage therapist, I share with them that I live with a chronic disease, and it's important in the context of being worked on. And this person tells me, meditation will cure that condition. And of course, I've heard this a bunch of times in the spirituality community. It's just mindset. You can think yourself out of a genetic biological condition. And of course, I got very triggered. We had a very tense interaction. And at some point, I suggested this is an opportunity for this person and I to do some healing work about this exact topic, which is trusting that people understand, they know their body, they know their experience. And so I got to experience it from the other side, which was really helpful to me as a leader to be on the other side of that power dynamic, to feel what it feels like if someone sort of prescribes what they think you need to be doing, and to go through those emotions, because it helped me become even more aware of, how I am interacting, even when I offer a suggestion, being very, very clear to clients that I want them to follow their own knowing. I want them to trust themselves, that they are the expert, they should own their wisdom. And that anything that is a suggestion is only that, or it's an idea, and then they get to decide whether it works for them or doesn't. And I love it because when I keep setting this tone for my one-to-one clients, and then of course in my community, people will tell me no. And of course I have that reaction, even though I've invited that, I have that sort of ego-based reaction sometimes. And then I have to sit with it and remind myself, this is what I want. I want them to hold their ground. I want them to be autonomous. I want them to know when something's right for them and when it's not. And so, so this was really timely. And I actually will pass this information about your association on to my list. I work with a lot of practitioners, so I think this would be really great for anyone who's interested in diving deeper into these kind of topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bevan. I'd like to say a few words about that. Bevan, that's fabulous. I think that there is a way that we can educate the people that we work with, and that often people are looking for guidance, they're looking for help outside themselves, and they don't recognize, what does it feel like when I know the truth? And I think a lot of what I do with my people is educate them. And part of that is the body awareness, like Catherine was talking about, and just noticing that I get this body, this sensitive instrument that tells me when I'm on the right track or I'm not, and doing safety checks, reality checks as well, but just kind of educating, holding a space for our people that they have access to the truth.
Can I follow on that for a moment, Catherine? I think that's great. I really love this conversation here, and one of the things, like Catherine Bell had mentioned earlier, was to bring more attention to your interactions with clients where there may have been past trauma around power over abuse. It's very difficult for people who have not experienced indoctrination to really get it. And I think that's part of what happens when we're trying to understand, how could that person have done that? It's the same thing in a domestic abuse situation where, you go back to the partner again and again, even though you're being abused. It's like we don't have access to or we don't have full access to our body where we can access the truth if we're indoctrinated. And if we've experienced that indoctrination at some point in our life, there's likely a bit of a trauma trigger, when we're exploring it or being in a new environment.
Thank you for sharing that, Jarette, because that's it. That's the heart of where the responsibility lies with us, right? Is to keep that in mind and to remember and to be, not hyper vigilant, but a little bit vigilant, right? I mean, there's a reason that when psychotherapists are trained, we're taught about transference and we're taught about self-disclosure. And all of those are literally checks on that whole power dynamic, and doing your own work and making sure that what you say or what you offer is for them, is for the other. So thank you so much for saying that. It's such a good reminder.
Who is next? Is it Tom? Go ahead, Tom. Unmute. Yes, you, Tom. Please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. I'm Tom. I'm a healer in the realm of being a medical doctor, primarily doing pain management and psychedelic work. And I'm also a Zen teacher. And I'm not sure if the perspectives that I'm going to offer are different, but they feel a little different to me. And one of the perspectives that I'd like to put out there is that, for instance, I was in the same community that Jarrett was in, and I did not experience it as a cult. My interactions with this community brought me to a very different place. And which brings me into how I work with dreams, and I work with dreams within the container of Zen Buddhist practice. And in Zen Buddhism, the practices that have been developed over the years are not necessarily designed to make people feel safe all the time. In fact, many of the practices are designed to create obstacles for people to work with, honoring the person the whole time, having gone through somewhat similar processes, knowing how difficult and challenging these processes can be, and honoring the individual, knowing that they are eventually going to find their own way. Now, whether that own way is by leaving the practice of Zen Buddhism or finding answers within that practice pattern, is neither here nor there, but though each individual is going to find their own way. One of the things that I come back to is transparency, and knowing what I'm offering to people who come in. I can confidently say to people, we're going to be working within the parameters of the general Zen Buddhist practice pattern, and we're going to be bringing dreams in as an adjunct to koan practice. And we sort of have those guardrails and say, if you find this helpful, wonderful. If you don't, then perhaps this isn't a path for you to follow. And I encourage you to seek your answers elsewhere. But while you're here practicing, we're going to work within these guardrails, within these Buddhist precepts. And then there's the obligation that I feel to constantly look at myself and try to illuminate the unconscious places where I might be interfering. And I'm interested in what other folks have found to be helpful there. Catherine mentioned peer groups, which I find. I continue to actively identify myself as a student of 3 other teachers, and engage as a student, at taking myself completely out of the role of being the teacher, to experience what it is constantly, weekly, to be in that student role, and to try to illuminate what comes up for me, perhaps from both sides of the student-teacher paradigm. But I'd be interested in hearing what other folks have been found helpful to do that personal illumination. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody want to respond to Tom?
I think that I would just add that an agreement from a different perspective of the idea of safety that he was mentioning. I think that the safety piece is not necessarily about the dream work itself. I feel that I actually never know what I'm going to find when I'm guiding someone around in their dream realms. And sometimes it could be something quite, there can be things that are quite bizarre, horrifying, and not safe feeling to them. The safety, the container of safety, I think, starts with the practitioner. Can the client go to those places with me? And some of the ways that I might have not made myself able to hold that safe container is if I haven't been listening to them and I haven't been letting them guide what is theirs. So that's just there's a small distinction, but I agree that it doesn't all have to be, pretty and safe inside that container of dream work. And I also just really agree that the process of staying on your inner work on a regular basis is critical. Thank you, Tom.
Yes, absolutely. Our own inner work is extremely important. And also I'd like Tom's suggestion of having roles where we can be the student as well, instead of the teacher, just in a student mode. That's very helpful.
We only have a little less than 10 minutes left. We have one person waiting to speak. Karish, do you want to take over?
Jared had something.
Try to keep it brief. We only have 8 or 9 minutes.
Sure. Excuse me just a minute. I think Jared had something she wanted to say.
Oh.
I just wanted to respond. Hello, Tom. It's beautiful to see you. And it's very common that people have different experiences in controlling unethical groups. That there is always some good in a group, and there's a lot to tease apart here in order to really get to where the violations take place. And I would welcome a conversation specifically with you, Tom, about that. And I think it could be something that could be really beneficial. So.
Thank you. Karish?
Yeah, I just wanted to share from my end certain things that I have learned and which I use very actively, particularly when I have people working with me. I also want to make it sure that I got it from as a development from a methodology called Aligning Perceptual Positions by a lady called Cornelia Andreas. So she designed it as a method to see if people are in relationship harmony. And as one of the questions was that when you see the other person in your imagination, are they at eye level or higher or lower? And I found it very interesting. And when I started working with different people, particularly those who are enamored by their teachers or this, they always put their teacher in their imagination at eye levels higher. And when these people came into therapy, one of the objectives that I would look for to see is that as a standard litmus test is that are the eye levels matching? Are they able to see the other as an equal? Okay. And I also make it a point to check that when I'm doing my work and my trainings, at the end, I want to make sure that I check and see if the participant is seeing me at eye level in their imagination. And if not, then we have a conversation about it till there is some kind of shift that happens. Because when you put somebody on a pedestal, you got to look up to them, or when you look down upon somebody, and it's going to manifest straight in your imagination. So we have a historical figure called Mirabai in Indian history. Now, she's quite famous, and she put her life at risk because she changed the paradigm of seeking God as not a vertical aspiration, but as a horizontal proximity. So she's very famous for taking Lord Krishna off the pedestal in the puja altar room and bringing it close to the bosom, and said that this is my lover. He's not at a pedestal higher or lower. And of course, the family and the clan that she belonged wanted to kill her for that. So she went to Vrindavan, where the Bhakti movement welcomed that particular thing. But I think the eye level in imagination as a litmus test is a very, very useful thing. Second, I just wanted to also share that I'm always wary of working with somebody or recommending anybody who's not part of a peer group. Because I think if they don't have a peer group, they don't have somebody that they have an accountability or they're willing to be transparent. I find that like absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's something in that nature. So I'm a great fan of people who are part of peer groups, and I see this as a peer group. So thank you.
I would add that there's an ASI team working on a model for establishing peer group supports for members. And that will be described and announced forthcoming. If there's do our panelists, we have about 3-4 minutes. Do you want to leave us with some final words? Catherine, and Jarrett? If not, then I would thank all three of you on behalf of ASI. Thank you so much for...
Can I just share one thing?
Yeah, please.
And that is that the work for myself that has been the most healing and inspiring for me since I got out of the group that I was involved in is developing a container for anyone who has experienced power over abuse of any form to be able to have a safe space to share their story. And it's really, I really have such profound respect for what happens when people stand in their own self freely and share any experience that they've had of power over abuse, because that actually is the correction of this kind of overly authoritarian kind of society that we live in, because no one can take our personal experiences from us. So I encourage everyone to share your own stories through #IGotOut, or learn more about it at igotout.org, but also really encourage your clients to reclaim their voice of any harms that they have experienced through telling their story.
That's a good note on which to end. I want to thank both Catherine and Jarrett for coming forth with this idea and for all the preparation and wisdom they shared today. Thanks everybody for attending. Let your friends know about ASI, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Well,